Florida used to be louder before Disney turned the entire state into a gravitational field that pulled every tourist dollar in a 50-mile radius. The Sunshine State was packed with homegrown attractions, roadside oddities, botanical wonders, live animal spectacles, and theme parks that people would drive hundreds of miles to see. Some of these places were beloved institutions. Some were genuinely bizarre. A few were both. Then the exits changed, the competition arrived, and one by one, the crowds thinned out. These are the 10 once famous attractions in Florida that are now dead. Number 10, Boardwalk and Baseball, Haines City. Boardwalk and Baseball opens this list because it did not fail gradually. It failed in approximately 3 years, which, even by Florida theme park standards, is impressively fast. The park was built on the bones of Circus World, a previous Ringling Brothers-affiliated park on the same Haines City property that had closed in 1986. Rather than let the site sit idle, new owners relaunched it in 1987 as Boardwalk and Baseball, a combination of classic boardwalk amusement park rides and a full professional-scale baseball stadium, which served as the spring training facility for the Kansas City Royals. The concept was to create a park that could go head-to-head with Walt Disney World's newly opened Epcot. That was the plan. The park had 32 rides, including the Florida Hurricane roller coaster, which was a wooden coaster that actually had a solid reputation among enthusiasts. The boardwalk section offered carnival games and midway attractions alongside the baseball stadium and exhibition games. The whole thing covered a substantial property in Polk County, and on paper, it sounds perfectly reasonable. The spring training deal with the Kansas City Royals was real, the rides were real, and the park was physically impressive. The deeper problem was positioning. You don't open a mid-sized regional park 3 miles from Walt Disney World and expect to compete on even terms. Disney had more money, more marketing, more capacity, more brand recognition, and, perhaps most importantly, more characters that children would scream to see. A boardwalk with a wooden coaster and a spring training facility is a solid regional attraction. It is not Epcot. In practice, it could not compete. The park drew visitors, but not nearly enough to sustain operations against Disney, SeaWorld, and Universal. Boardwalk and Baseball closed on January 17, 1990, less than 3 years after opening. The Florida Hurricane roller coaster was dismantled. The stadium was eventually demolished. The site was later redeveloped. What remains is a short, humbling chapter in Florida theme park history about the difference between a good idea and a viable one. Number 9, Six Gun Territory, Ocala. Six Gun Territory was a Wild West-themed amusement park that opened in 1963 in Silver Springs, just outside Ocala, and for about 2 decades it was genuinely popular. The park was centered around a recreated frontier town complete with staged gunfights, stagecoach rides, a steam train, saloon shows, and a full cast of Western character performers. It drew families who wanted something that felt like the American frontier at a time when that kind of nostalgia was reliably marketable. At its peak, Six Gun Territory attracted enough visitors to fill its wooden boardwalk streets and keep its performers employed year-round. Locals from the Ocala area grew up with it as a fixture of summer entertainment. Dan Blocker and Michael Landon, both of the television series Bonanza, made appearances at the park during the 1960s, a fact that people who were there still bring up decades later. The park sat in close proximity to Silver Springs, which was drawing its own enormous crowds during the same period, and the two attractions fed off each other's tourism traffic. Visitors would combine both in a single Florida vacation day. Glass-bottom boats in the morning, staged shootouts in the afternoon. It was a specific, perfectly assembled version of what a Florida road trip used to look like. Then Walt Disney World opened in 1971, and the math stopped working. Like most Florida attractions that operated outside the Orlando megaplex, Six Gun Territory found itself in a losing competition for the same tourist pool. Attendance declined through the 1970s as the new interstate highway system also rerouted traffic patterns that had previously funneled visitors along the older U.S. routes where the park sat. By 1984, the park closed permanently. The steam train station, the old storefronts, and sections of the boardwalk sat abandoned for years, slowly being reclaimed by the Central Florida vegetation. The site was eventually cleared, and redeveloped. Number 8. Splendid Kissimmee. Splendid was a $100 million 76-acre theme park that opened in Kissimmee in November 1993, just a few miles west of Walt Disney World. The concept was extraordinary in ambition. 60-plus miniature replicas of most famous landmarks, each built at 1/10 scale by artisans who were brought over from and spent 2 years constructing them brick by tiny brick. The park's half-mile-long replica of the Great Wall alone required nearly 7 million miniature bricks. The 4-story recreation of the Leishan Buddha, a meticulous, forbidden city. The Terracotta Army, acrobats, dancers, martial artists, and traditional music accompanying visitors as they wandered through 5,000 years of Chinese history spread across a Florida landscape. It was, by any fair measure, an extraordinary place to look at. The problem was the politics. The park was owned by Travel Service, a state-owned enterprise of the People's Republic of, and from the moment it opened, it was met by organized protests from Tibetan exile groups, Uyghur activists, and Falun Gong practitioners who argued the park was serving as propaganda for the Chinese government. Monks in saffron robes stood outside the gates on opening day. Over the following decade, there were more than 30 documented demonstrations at the entrance. School boards across Florida banned field trips to the park. The Florida Teachers Union passed a resolution against personal or school visits. The park was losing an estimated $9 million a year by 1999. The park closed on December 31, 2003. Its official statement was measured, Florida's Splendid theme park will discontinue operations in Central Florida as of the close of business on December 31, 2003. This determination was reached primarily due to the continued downturn in the tourism economy. Post-9/11 tourism was cited. The politics were not mentioned in the official statement, though they had been the central obstacle for a decade. Its assets were auctioned off in late 2004. The miniature buildings sat abandoned for years, vandalized, and slowly consumed by the Florida weather, becoming a destination for urban explorers and skateboarders. Demolition began in 2013, and the site was eventually redeveloped as Margaritaville Resort Orlando, a resort built on the concept of not thinking about your problems, which is a fitting successor to a park destroyed by precisely that. There is almost nothing left of what the artisans built. 6 million miniature bricks, 2 years of construction, and a sincere ambition to bring Chinese culture to Florida. All of it now sitting under Jimmy Buffett's parking lot. Number 7. Silver Springs, Ocala. Long before Disney, before Universal, before any of the modern theme park infrastructure that defines Florida tourism today, Silver Springs was the attraction in Florida. It has been receiving visitors since the 1870s, which means it was drawing tourists before the state had a functioning road network. The springs themselves, a large natural freshwater system near Ocala that pushes out hundreds of millions of gallons of crystalline water per day, created one of the most visually stunning natural environments on the continent. The glass-bottom boat, which Silver Springs essentially invented in the late 1870s, when a local named Hullum Jones fixed a piece of glass to the bottom of a rowboat, let visitors float above the springs and watch the underwater world below in perfect clarity. The boats became synonymous with the park and with Florida tourism itself. In the 1930s, Hollywood discovered Silver Springs. Scenes from 6 Tarzan films were shot here. Creature from the Black Lagoon filmed here in 1954. James Dean came for Rebel Without a Cause. Gary Cooper. Even a James Bond film, Moonraker, in 1979. President Ulysses Grant visited in 1880. President Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. In the 1930s, herpetologist Ross Allen established the Ross Allen Reptile Institute at the park, drawing additional crowds by wrestling alligators and milking rattlesnakes for their venom in front of live audiences, which it turns out was a reliable and sustainable business model in mid-century Florida. At its 1960s peak, Silver Springs was receiving up to 5,000 visitors on weekday afternoons and 6,000 to 7,000 on weekends. It tied with the Grand Canyon for the #1 attraction in the country in 1963, noted author Lou Vickers. That's how big it was. By the 2000s, attendance had declined significantly. Competition from larger parks, rising maintenance costs, hurricane damage, and water quality issues from agricultural runoff degraded the springs over time. In 2013, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection took over operations and folded the site into Silver Spring State Park. The animal exhibits, the jungle cruise, the Jeep Safari, the Reptile Institute, all of it was dismantled or closed. The glass-bottom boats still run. The water is still remarkable. But the attraction that packed 5,000 visitors on a Tuesday in the 1960s is now a quiet state park where you pay $2 to get in. Number 6, Miami Serpentarium, Pinecrest. You could spot the Miami Serpentarium from the road because of the 35-foot concrete cobra statue that stood at the entrance, tongue extended, staring down at drivers on US Route 1 south of Miami. That statue alone was enough to make people slow down. What was inside was considerably stranger. The Miami Serpentarium opened in 1947 and was the life's work of Bill Haast, a man who had been fascinated by snakes since childhood, had been bitten by a rattlesnake at age 11, and had apparently decided that this was a sign to lean in rather than retreat. Haast's professional routine involved extracting venom from venomous snakes, king cobras, green mambas, puff adders, Russell's vipers, and dozens of other species. In front of a paying audience, 5 shows per day, in a white laboratory coat, without the snake showing him any particular professional courtesy. By the time the Serpentarium closed, he had been bitten 173 times by venomous snakes. 17 of those bites nearly killed him. He also, starting in 1948, injected himself weekly with a cocktail of venom from 28 species, believing it would build immunity and potentially extend his life. He donated his venom-enriched blood to snakebite victims more than 20 times and was credited with saving multiple lives when no anti-venom was available. Medical researchers from the University of Miami worked with Haast in the 1940s and 1950s on cobra venom as a potential treatment for polio. Research that was still underway when Jonas Salk's vaccine rendered the question moot in 1955. The FDA was not particularly enthusiastic about his subsequent theories on venom as a treatment for multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and arthritis. Haast didn't seem to mind. At its peak, the Serpentarium drew up to 50,000 visitors annually. In 1977, a 6-year-old boy fell into the facility's crocodile pit and was killed by a 12-foot crocodile named Cookie. The animal had a history of escaping its enclosure, according to staff who worked there. Haast went into the pen at 4:30 in the morning and shot the animal. He was never fully able to move past it. "I've created a monster with this place," he told a reporter. "Now I'm stuck with it." The Serpentarium closed in 1984. A shopping center now stands on the site, with a small historical marker that most people walk past without reading. Haast lived to be 100 years old, dying in 2011. The giant cobra statue was donated to a South Miami high school, which uses cobras as its mascot. Number 5. Circus World, Haines City. Circus World deserves its own entry rather than just a footnote to Boardwalk and Baseball, because in its heyday, it was genuinely spectacular and genuinely weird. The park opened in 1974 in Haines City, developed by the Feld family, who at the time also owned Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. The concept was a combination theme park and circus experience, centered around a 27,000 square foot building designed to look like an enormous circus tent, which contained live performances, including a polar bear show, a lion tamer act, a flaming high diver, elephant rides and performances, and, because it was that era, an abundance of clowns. Visitors could also attempt to walk a tightrope or swing on a trapeze, which is a genuinely unusual thing to offer a family from Indianapolis who is driven down in a station wagon. What made Circus World distinctive from other Florida parks was the scale of its live performance component. This wasn't a theme park with a small show area. The circus acts were the main event, and for several years in the mid-1970s, it worked. The park had real attendance, real enthusiasm, and real reviews. The experience of watching a professional circus lion tamer or high diver in the same afternoon you rode a wooden roller coaster was, by most accounts, genuinely memorable. It was not like anything else in Florida. Then the problem started. The Feld family sold the park in the early 1980s, and it passed through multiple owners who struggled with the economics of operating a full circus within a theme park format. The ongoing cost of maintaining and insuring live exotic animals, the wear on aging infrastructure, and the relentless competition from Orlando all contributed. Attendance declined, the acts got cheaper, the infrastructure aged. By 1986, Circus World had closed. The site was rebuilt as Boardwalk and Baseball in 1987, which, as we've already established, also failed. The land was eventually cleared entirely. What once housed elephants and high divers is now commercial development in Polk County. Number 4. Cypress Gardens. Winter Haven. Cypress Gardens is the one on this list that arguably had the best run. Florida's first commercial theme park opened on January 2, 1936, 12 years before the Miami Serpentarium, 35 years before Disney World. And for the better part of 3 decades, it was the premier tourist destination in the state of Florida. Not one of the premier attractions, the premier attraction. Dick Pope Sr. and his wife Julie built it around an 8,000-plant botanical garden in Winter Haven, and Dick Pope was an extraordinarily skilled promoter who understood that Cypress Gardens needed to be constantly photographed, filmed, and covered in national media to stay relevant. He covered the park with Southern belles, women dressed in elaborate antebellum hoop skirts, who stood against the garden backdrop specifically to be photographed. He hired Hollywood film crews. The park appeared in over 50 films and television productions across its history. The water ski shows became Cypress Gardens' other signature. The park invented the sport of water skiing as a spectator experience, staged team performances on Lake Eloise that broke more than 50 world records, and earned the self-declared title of Water Ski Capital of the World. In 1963, Cypress Gardens tied with the Grand Canyon as the #1 tourist attraction in the country, according to surveys from that year. Roy Disney visited Cypress Gardens in the early 1950s and was so impressed that he called his brother Walt from Dick Pope's office to tell him what he was seeing, people happily paying to walk through a garden, watch shows, and pose with costumed characters. Some historians credit Cypress Gardens as a direct conceptual ancestor of Disneyland, which opened in California in 1955. Then Walt Disney World opened in 1971, and Cypress Gardens entered a 3-decade decline of ownership changes, failed reinventions, hurricane damage, and falling attendance. The park was sold to Harcourt Brace and Jovanovich in 1985, then to Bush Corporation in 1989, then to a management group, then to Kent Buescher in 2004, who briefly reopened it as Cypress Gardens Adventure Park before the park filed for bankruptcy in 2006, partly due to damage from Hurricanes Charlie, Francis, and Jeanne, which hit Florida in rapid succession in 2004. The park closed in 2003, briefly reopened, and then closed for good on September 23, 2009. Merlin Entertainments purchased the site in 2010 and opened Legoland Florida in 2011. The botanical gardens survive, preserved inside the Legoland property, still containing the original banyan tree planted in 1939. The glass-bottom pool from the 1953 Esther Williams film Easy to Love is on the National Register of Historic Places, but the Southern Belles are now made of Legos. Number 3, Parrot Jungle, Miami. Parrot Jungle was one of those Miami institutions that felt so permanent it was difficult to imagine the city without it. The park opened in 1936, the same year as Cypress Gardens, in a natural hammock environment on the edge of Miami, and its founder Franz Scher had a genuinely unusual business model. Let the parrots, macaws, and tropical birds roam freely through the trees and gardens while visitors walked among them. No cages. Just birds everywhere. Trained to interact with guests, perch on shoulders, ride bicycles, and perform for audiences in regular shows. The combination of the lush hammock setting, the sheer number of free-flying birds, and the fact that you could get a macaw on your shoulder for a photo made Parrot Jungle genuinely distinctive in an era when Florida was full of competing attractions. At its peak, the park held more than 1,100 birds across hundreds of species and drew hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. The flamingo shows, where trained birds performed in choreographed displays, became particularly famous. Celebrities visited. The park appeared in films and television productions. It became a genuine piece of Miami's identity. The original Pinecrest location had something the new Watson Island facility couldn't replicate: the feeling of walking through a real Florida hammock where the birds happen to be everywhere, rather than an artificial island park where the birds happen to be in a designed enclosure. That distinction between a place that felt genuinely natural and one that felt planned mattered more than anyone anticipated when the decision to move was made. For 65 years, Parrot Jungle operated at its original Pinecrest location. Then, in 2002, it packed up and moved. The new facility, renamed Parrot Jungle Island, opened on Watson Island near downtown Miami in 2003. The free-roaming naturalistic environment that had defined the park for decades didn't transfer to the new artificial setting. Attendance struggled. The park went through financial difficulties, changed hands, and eventually rebranded as Jungle Island. It continues to operate in a reduced form today, focused more on private events and interactive animal experiences than on the original bird park concept. The original Pinecrest location is now a public park, Cypress Gardens, which preserved portions of the historic hammock. The Parrot Jungle that people drove to Miami to visit for 60 years is gone. Number 2, Pirates World, Dania Beach. Pirates World is the one on this list that most people have never heard of, which is a shame because its brief run was genuinely interesting, not just as a theme park, but as an accidental music venue. The park opened in 1967 in Dania Beach in Broward County, South Florida, and was built around a pirate theme: a large lagoon, swashbuckling-inspired rides, treasure hunt theming, and the general sensibility of the mid-1960s interpretation of what pirates meant for children's entertainment. For a regional park operating in South Florida before Disney World, it drew a respectable audience. The admission prices were modest, the rides were family-friendly, and the Broward County location gave it access to the Miami and Fort Lauderdale metro areas without requiring a long drive. Then something unexpected happened. Because Pirates World had a large outdoor amphitheater built for its live shows and entertainments, and because South Florida in the late 1960s and early 1970s had virtually no large outdoor concert venues, the park started booking rock concerts. The Rolling Stones played Pirates World in 1969. The Doors played there. The Who, Jimi Hendrix performed on that stage, Led Zeppelin, Janis Joplin. For a few years, the amusement park with the Pirate Lagoon in Dania Beach was hosting some of the most significant rock acts in the world, largely because there was nowhere else near in South Florida for those shows to happen. The park became, almost accidentally, one of the most important concert venues in the South. Walt Disney World opened in 1971, and the competition was fatal. Unable to sustain operations against the pull of the Orlando Megaplex, Pirates World closed in 1975. The site was developed into condominiums, erasing all physical evidence of both the amusement park and the concert stage where some of rock history's most significant artists had performed. No marker, no memorial, no acknowledgement that this was once the place where Jimi Hendrix played a show. Number 1, Cypress Knee Museum, Polk City. Every list of Florida's lost attractions includes the grand theme parks and the famous roadside oddities. But the Cypress Knee Museum deserves the top spot here not for its scale, it had none, but for being the most purely Florida thing that has ever existed. Tom Gaskins was a Florida folk artist and entrepreneur who spent decades collecting and sculpting cypress knees, the knobbly root protrusions that grow above the waterline around cypress trees in Florida's swamps. Gaskins saw faces, figures, and creatures in the natural forms of the knees, and he either carved them further or left them as is and displayed them with labels, like tiny sculptures. He made cypress knee art a legitimate category of Florida folk tradition, and more than that, he made people stop their cars to look at it. The museum he built on U.S. Route 27 in Polk County was a genuine roadside phenomenon. For decades, people stopped to look at what a self-taught Florida swamp artist had done with tree stumps. He had a catwalk that stretched out over the actual swamp water. He had signs along the highway that read, "See the Cypress Knee Museum," for hundreds of miles in each direction. And he had the absolute conviction that what he was doing was worth doing. There is something admirable about a man who decides that his life's work is Cypress knee art, and then just goes ahead and builds a museum. At its peak, the museum was pulling in as many as 100,000 visitors a year, entirely on the strength of Cypress knee art, a roadside sign strategy, and Route 27 status as a primary Florida travel corridor before the interstates arrived. It was exactly the kind of idiosyncratic, impossible-to-replicate attraction that could only exist before mass tourism homogenized the experience of travel. It was also completely, unapologetically Florida in a way that nothing manufactured for a theme park ever is. Gaskins died in 1998. His son Tom Jr. attempted to keep the museum running, but was forced to close it in 2000 after a break-in. The highway traffic that had sustained it was long gone. The swamp eventually reclaimed the property. It'll never be completely lost with reptile people, as herpetologist Joe Wasilewski once said of the Miami Serpentarium, and the same could be said of the Cypress Knee Museum by Floridians of a certain age. You either stopped there as a kid and remember it for the rest of your life, or you missed it entirely. Florida used to have hundreds of places like it. Most of them are gone. Florida's tourism landscape has been completely remade in the last 50 years, and almost nothing from the era before Disney survived the transition intact. The attractions on this list didn't fail because they were bad. Most of them were genuinely extraordinary in their own right. They failed because the world they existed in stopped existing, and the world that replaced it had different rules, different highways, different expectations, and a mouse that made everyone else look like a reasonable but insufficient alternative. Some of these places still echo in the people who visited them. The Parrot Jungle of 1970s Miami, the glass-bottom boats at Silver Springs before the crowds left, the giant cobra over Route 1, the cypress knees standing in a Polk County swamp, Jimi Hendrix on the outdoor stage at a pirate-themed park in Dania Beach, which is a sentence that sounds impossible and is entirely true. Florida without any of it is a cleaner, more organized, more reliably entertaining place. It is also a lot less interesting. If you enjoyed this one, hit the like button. It makes a real difference. And if you want more deep dives into the places and stories that shaped and were then reshaped by America, subscribe and don't miss what's coming next.